Hello! Hi everyone! Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're finally answering the age-old question of what kind of astronaut food do you eat with chopsticks with this amazingly casual Daniel Dae Kim clip from the movie Stowaway.
We're sorry that you missed the filet mignon, but this is the next best thing. We think it's spaghetti.
Okay, so just blowing right past the fact that Daniel Dae Kim's chopstick technique here is freaking flawless, I'm gonna start off with a few very basic assumptions. Based off of the fact that Daniel Dae Kim is Korean American, born in Busan, and the chopsticks that he's using are also the flat metal type of Korean chopsticks, which by the way are even harder to use than the round wooden Chinese chopsticks, I'm gonna assume that what he's eating is some form of Korean small bite dish, or banchan. Now, for those who are not familiar, banchan broadly refers to the dozen or so small side dishes that you get with your meal when you eat at Korean barbecue restaurants. It can include a wide variety of dishes including things like kimchi, daikon, japchae glass noodles, bean sprouts, mung beans, and more. And in fact, if you find yourself at a really good Korean barbecue spot, oftentimes these banchan side dishes can end up being the highlight of the meal. One of my personal favorite banchan dishes is Gamja Jorim, which is a potato that is seared and then braised in a sweet and savory honey glaze. It's high in protein and nutrition, it's reasonably pantry stable in an astronaut vacuum sealed bag at least, and most importantly, it cooks in a braise, so it would reheat very well. So I'm just making a small leap here, but I'm gonna assume that this is what he was eating. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so kicking things off as we very often do, I'm starting by crushing and mincing 4 cloves of garlic, followed by fine mincing 1 inch or about 1 tablespoon of ginger. We'll be blooming these for their aromatic qualities very first, then tossing our potatoes in them before our braise. Next up are our potatoes here. Now, I experimented with a few different varieties of potato for this dish. Those who have followed the live streams know my earliest attempts used plain old russet potatoes, more on that later. And I know I've also seen many versions using fingerling or baby potatoes for their bite-sized nature. I personally ended up settling on some Yukon Golds here, partly because they're relatively easy to find here in the States, but also because the skins will crisp up nicely and play well with our braise, since we'll have plenty of time for them to become tender. Whatever potatoes we do choose to use, however, most importantly, I'm making sure to trim off the edges before large dicing so that we have relatively evenly sized bites. This is important because we're going to be searing our potatoes today, so if we leave the thinner edges of our potatoes on where they taper off, it's gonna start burning. I'm rinsing these down to make sure there's no extra starch sticking around. Then I'm setting them aside in some water to prevent oxidation while we get to work on our braising sauce. Okay, so starting things off in my mixing bowl here first is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and a single tablespoon of sesame oil. Then rounding things out is a single tablespoon each of dark soy sauce, black vinegar, dry sake, and fish sauce. The dark soy sauce and black vinegar are gonna give us some nice malted sweetness, and the sake and fish sauce will bring out some nice fermented brightness. Then I'm rounding all of this out with a pinch of kosher salt to taste, and then in a separate bowl, I'm combining 2 tablespoons each of honey and maple syrup. We're keeping these 2 elements separate today because we're going to be adding our sweet and syrupy elements much later than the rest of our braise to make sure that the sugars in these 2 elements don't start to burn. Once these are ready to go, I'm setting them aside and we're heading over to the stove. Over on the stove, I have my wok heating as hot as possible, then I'm adding 4 tablespoons of peanut oil here, and as always, long yao for your non-stick surface. Then I'm adding my potatoes a piece at a time to my wok, making sure that the largest side of the potato is facing downward to achieve the best possible sear. If you do own a flat bottom wok, now would be a good time to use it, since you'll notice I am having a little bit of trouble getting these things to stay put in my round bottom wok. A cast iron pan will also work great at this point too, or if not, just remember that the pieces at the bottom of your round bottom wok will sear a little bit faster than the others since there's more oil pulled up there. I'm letting this go undisturbed for a full 2.5 minutes before tossing and cooking for an additional minute. These are gonna have a nice long braise later on, so we don't need our potatoes to be completely cooked through. We're just trying to develop a little bit of a sear to keep these nice and crispy. I'm working in batches here to make sure I don't overload my wok. Mine took 2 batches altogether. Then I'm removing everything, adding an additional 2 tablespoons of peanut oil, and giving it one more long yao before we start on our aromatics. Going into my wok first here is my garlic and ginger, which I'm blooming for about 10 to 15 seconds until fragrant. Then I'm adding my potatoes back to the wok and giving those a toss before I set my wok ring up on the stove, followed by my sauce mixture in about a half a cup of water, or just enough to make sure that our potatoes are mostly submerged. I'm letting this simmer for a full 30 minutes, adding more water as needed. Then about 5 minutes before we finish up, I'm adding my honey and maple syrup elements and tossing to combine until we have a nice fork tender piece of potato that should be accompanied by a thick and luxurious glaze. I'm finishing all of this off with a pinch of sesame seeds, and we're ready to eat. So, I mentioned this earlier, and I'll keep saying it, but this is one of my favorite Korean banchan sides of all time. It's rich and flavorful with deep umami qualities, but not overwhelmingly sweet as many honey-based glazes often end up being. The addition of maple syrup gives our potatoes a super interesting aromatic sweetness, and the skins of our yukons are wonderfully tender and chewy. For those who have been following the live streams, I actually initially improvised my way through this recipe on the first attempt when folks challenged me to work some russet potatoes into a wok fry. This, of course, immediately got me thinking about the Gamja Jorim, which I saw Daniel Dae Kim eating in space, and as it turns out, you could totally eat this out of an astronaut food bag. As I expected, pretty much anything that reheats in a microwave well, like ramen, curries, soup, and anything long cooked like a braised potato, would for sure be amenable to one of these weird astronaut vacuum sealed bags. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. If you haven't caught one yet, I've been taking polls over on the community tab of the channel every few weeks with all of the things in my refrigerator, and then assembling dishes based on what folks vote for in a new live stream series called Woo Can Cook Whatever You Tell Me To. It's mostly resulted in fairly strange meals like ramen fried rice with cheese, which was actually not that bad, but every once in a while we seem to end up with something tasty like this one. We'll be doing another one of those this coming Thursday, so keep an eye on the community tab to vote on some ingredients soon. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, press some buttons, and I'll see you soon. Bye.